That night, Duncan set off with his slate trucks from the quarry to home. It was a full moon, just like in Rusty's story. As he approached the old iron bridge, his driver stopped him in the middle. Why have we stopped?" asked Duncan. "I think I see something from the other side," his driver replied, acting according to plan. Up ahead, they saw a flickering light. To his crew, they were fireflies, but to Duncan, they looked like an engine. However, the latter would soon be right. As Duncan's fireman was about to throw the rock into the marsh below, puffing was heard around the bridge. "That's strange," said the fireman. "I don't remember another train running tonight other than us." "They don't," the driver quivered. Then all of a sudden, a white figure in the shape of a cabless little engine puffed out of the darkness towards them. Duncan could only watch as the figure sped towards them. However, the figure steered off the bridge and disappeared. But worse was yet to come. Following this was a huge sound of a splash, then screams. "Help! Help! Anyone out there? Help!" The screams were loud and chilling. Panicking, the driver turned on his flashlight and aimed it down to the marsh. Nothing. It's the ghost!" Duncan yelled. "Get us the blazes out of here!" With that, Duncan's driver pulled the lever out of fright, and the train went to the home yards as fast as the evening wind. They then quickly uncoupled the trucks, and Duncan went safely back to the sheds, frightened. He shut his eyes and hoped for the better. After a few moments, he opened them, and no ghost was in sight. He then went to sleep, relieved that he got away from the bridge. Suddenly, a light brightened from under the shed door. Duncan woke up, and he was really spooked now. "Please, Spirit," he bellowed in fear. "Leave me be. I don't want to go back on that bridge. Please, don't drag me back." The door opened to reveal the real source. Skarloey. "Calm down, Duncan," the old engine said. "It's only me. What happened 2 hours ago?" Duncan just said, "Bridge, engine, cause for help, ghost." Skarloey was dismayed. He immediately knew what Duncan was talking about. The next morning, news was quickly spread around the Skarloey Railway about last night's event. Duncan was officially traumatized, and his crew were found insane and sent to a reformatory for information. The Thin Controller tried to cope with the yellow engine, but it was no use, so he had to inform all the engines. "I'm afraid Duncan won't be in service for a while until further notice," he sighed. "So Duke and Peter Sam will help with the workloads until we either find a spare engine or something snaps him back to normal." With that, he walked out, with one more glance at Duncan's pale face. "Oh dear," Peter Sam said in dismay. "I think we overdone this." "What are you implying?" Rheneas asked. Peter Sam told him the trick and Rusty's story. Skarloey gave out a big sigh and made his confession. That story is no fairy tale, he said. It really happened. Rusty and the other engines gasped. Really? Rusty asked in shock. Of course, said Rheneas. It happened 4 years before Duke was found, and probably around me and Scarlowi's 100th birthday. Then why didn't you tell us sooner? Sir Handel demanded. It's a long story, Scarlowi answered. But since the schedule has been changed for the season, I finally have to confess. And this was the story he told. A long time ago, there was a small railway just next door to ours. It was called the Dartmoor Quarry Railway. Sure, we have the slate mines, but this railway was our rival. It formed to take slate from an abandoned mine from the Mid-Sodor Railway and used it to bring slate from there to the wharf, where a lorry would take it by road. The manager was a man of greed and recognition. He wanted to take credit for all the hard work Rheneas and I did, pulling all the slate. What's worse was that he didn't maintain the railway the way our controller does. The engines who worked there never had any overhauls or rebuilds, and the track was a 50-50 chance of disaster just waiting to happen. The final nail in the coffin was the old iron bridge. The tracks were the least smoothest out of all the lines on the railway. The girders were loose, and worst of all, a big marsh deep enough for an engine to be submerged in it. How awful, said Peter Sam. That manager was horrid for trespassing on closed property, Duke added in realization. Indeed, Scarlowi replied, and without me or Rheneas, Dartmoor seemed to be winning until when Rheneas came home, Dartmoor began to suffer. Finances were dropping due to the bills that were dropping in, and many people left their homes near Dartmoor to come to us. Engines were forced to work extra hard, delivering slate day to night. However, it wasn't enough. And in 6 months' time, the railway would go out of business. One night, though, in 1965, a few months before the closing, a couple of thieves were on the old iron bridge, stealing scrap from the girders to sell. They were in need of cash to get food for their families. They knew that they were doing this for them, but they didn't know that they were going to be responsible for what happened next. A train of stone was to cross the bridge with the engine pushing it. I say pushing it because the front truck lost its front coupling, so a lamp had to be put on it. However, the engine pushing the train didn't see from the stone trucks. The first truck hit a snag on the track and came off the rails, and without the girders, the front truck dragged the rest of the engine down as well. The engine whistled for help as it plunged into the swamps below. The crew of the engine cried out for help, but because it was nighttime, nobody came. They were then dragged down into the marsh by the weight of the train. The next morning, the railwaymen searched for the missing train and found them. but there was no way to recover them, and so they left them buried in the marsh. The railway closed a few months later, just as predicted, and it became a nature walk for campers. However, they mostly see the old iron bridge where the fateful accident occurred. But one full moon night, some hikers were camping near the bridge. Then they heard noises. They looked ahead and saw the figure of an engine trying to cross the bridge, but it faded before reaching the other side. A splash followed, and the cries for help. So it happens from that day onward. The engines were silent until Sir Handel spoke up. Oh, so no wonder why the thing controller's feeling so worried about that bridge. And I actually felt bad for those who worked there, especially the one who fell. Some were lucky to be sold to a better railways, said Rheneas, but the rest are in pieces and stored away in that quarry building. No more words were spoken for a half a minute until the thing controller arrived. I've got good news and bad news, he said. The bad news is that I had to do a dozen interviews on TV, and it disrupted the work schedule for the day. The good news, though, I have information from the Northwestern Railway that their number 7 rediscovered a narrow gauge engine from the old mines. So he'll be here to help while Duncan is out of action. That's great, Peter Sam said happily. And as a double win, the thing controller continued, we are getting new girders for the old iron bridge, so that nothing falls into the marsh ever again. So I want Sir Handel to help Rusty with the installation. All right, sir. Sir Handel sighed. With that, the thing controller walked back home to rest. The engines were happy by the news, especially now that the bridge would be safe. At last, so the ghost engine could finally reach the other side. Starting the next morning, Rusty, Sir Handel, and the workmen began the task on the girder installation. Together, the two engines hauled the heavy steel girders from the wharf to the bridge. Workmen then unloaded the girders and easily welded them to the bridge. The process lasted until early November, when the bridge was finally done. Rusty was glad, but Sir Handel was exhausted. Oh, bubbling boilers, Sir Handel panted. I could barely keep up with you, with all the steel we had to carry. Then you're lucky to have traction tires on your training wheels, Rusty replied. They work wonders. That night, though, the two engines were left on the quarry side of the bridge. Their crews were too tired to drive them back home, so they had to camp out near the line. Rusty didn't mind, but Sir Handel was annoyed. Well, this blows, said Sir Handel. Now bugs are gonna crawl on us without the shelter back in the sheds. Rusty didn't need to reply. He just looked up at the sky. Stars were gleaming, and the wind blew the leaves to another location. However, Rusty was concerned about one thing. The moon was full. It's coming again, he said mournfully. What's coming again? Asked Sir Handel, but then he quickly realized it. Oh, right. A whistle echoed through the valley, and puffing noises became more clear. The two engines gulped. They knew what was going to happen next. The ghost engine was heading towards them. It got on the bridge. Sir Handel began to quiver while Rusty stared at the approaching figure on up. The engine got halfway, but it did not fall. "Oh no!" cried Sir Handel, shutting his eyes. "It's no use escaping him. He's done playing games. We're goners!" The ghost engine finally made it over the bridge and got closer to them. Then, it stopped just inches from Rusty's buffers. The diesel was speechless. He had never gotten this close to a ghost in his life. However, the engine grew a face and smiled at him. Rusty was confused. "Thank you," it said, and then he faded away. Sir Handel opened his eyes to find the ghost engine gone. "Is it over, Rusty?" he asked, looking around for anything else. "Well," Rusty replied, "because the accident was caused by a lack of girders, I think so." Not another word was spoken until the next morning. When the crews woke up, they drove the engines back to the sheds. Duke, Peter, Sam, and Bertram, the engine the NWR found and restored, were there. "So, Falcon," Duke said, "how was it last night?" Sir Handel did not reply. He was still frightened by the encounter. Rusty spoke up for him. "It's the ghost engine from last night. He finally made it to the other side of the bridge. The girders work. The ghost is finally at peace." "That's great," Peter Sam replied happily. "I thought it was all over when he finally did it," Sir Handel added in trauma. "But I'm glad the spirit was nice to thank you for your hard work," Duke responded. The events from that November night had ended the jinx the railway had been through. Duncan heard about the ghost engine finally resting in peace and was over the encounter. Earlier, his crew was released from the asylum after a quick investigation that led to the girders being made. Now that Duncan was back on his wheels, he works without complaining. A bit often, he'll become eager to help a friend in need. Bertram was always given to a newly formed Mid-Sodor Heritage Railway as the line's number 6 following Duncan's comeback. Still, however, Duncan remembers that night he encountered the ghost, and when he brought it up to Britt Allcroft, he told her to make the episode the way his driver and fireman attended. So Britt granted Duncan's wish, and the secret was kept safe. The controversy surrounding the old iron bridge had come to an end. The end. And that, my friends, was Duncan Gets Spooked, alternate ending. This was made on Whitepad, made by Mighty Super Noob 9998. If he's somehow watching this, I really enjoyed the story, and I'm also sorry if I mispronounced a few things. But anyway, I really thought it was a very good story. To me, I really think it was a very good story. Well, I actually thought it was going to be more sinister, but this is this story is awesome, I have to tell you. This is awesome. And I can't wait to maybe look at another story that would be like something like this. Of course, I do go with my way with like the engine being named Andrew, and like it's nothing like what I just read, but still, this was an amazing thing to read.